Good afternoon, everybody. I know some of you are still working on your lunch, and we do have around 60 people who signed up for this section. So we'll just start slowly and let people drop in. By the way, my name is Yinin Chow, and I'm from the Center for Teaching and Educational Technologies. And with me is Sherilyn Thompson from the International Program Office. So we'll be co-facilitating today's section. Okay. Before we start, I would like to invite Tavi Pather and Mary Burgess to come up to say a few welcome words for us.
Welcome. Well, I just want to say thank you for once again joining us in this ongoing dialogue. I know it preceded my arrival here, but over the last year we've been engaged in this dialogue around diversity, internationalization. We have now started to talk about the notion of internationalization at home, whereby we engage everybody, as many people as possible, about global citizenship, internationalization, diversity, recognizing that there may not be too many touch points around those topics for everyone, but wherever there's opportunity to connect on those ideas, on those themes, we should utilize them. Today is just one example of how we can connect people, especially people from the teaching fraternity, in terms of what it's like for students coming from another cultural background, another way of thinking, what it's like for them to learn, and how you can incorporate their perceptions and understandings about our learning methodologies into the way you teach.
Mary?
I'm allowed to. Thank you for coming. I especially want to thank the students. In the Center for Teaching and Educational Technology, our role is primarily to support faculty in developing courses. So understanding the student experience better will go a long way to helping us do a better job of that. So thank you, and thank you to all of you for coming.
Thank you, Mary. And I must thank the students as well. I have worked with them to prepare for this session and sharing our experience together. And those conversations really help me think and reflect how I can incorporate their perspective in the design and delivery of our teaching and learning here. So I must say thank you for you guys agreeing to come here today, and like to extend this conversation to the larger group, to all of us. And you will have a lot of opportunities to ask questions or share your experience as well. But we do have limited time. We booked an hour, and I imagine it's going to be a very lively discussion. So I have left some flip chart paper at the back. If there are any questions that we didn't really get to it today, or you have any comments or any suggestions for future topics that you'd like to have a session like this, we're also going to plan to put on some workshop for faculties or for students in the future. So any kind of suggestions around those things, please feel free to speak to it today or to put your comments on the paper at the back there. Great. So I titled the session today, Exploring Cultural Differences in Teaching and Learning, and the key word here is really exploring. We want to share our perspective and just hear stories. We have students from 5 countries today represented here, so it's going to be a very rich sharing experience. So let me just set the stage for our conversation today. And I'd like to start with this picture here. We all know there are a lot of cultural differences in teaching and learning, in our practices, in this setting or outside, in education in general. And this picture really captures the essence of that for me and speaks to that point very well. At least for me, 15 years ago, being an international student myself, and reflecting on this experience 15 years later, and being an educator throughout my career. This is a picture I took last year when I went back to Taiwan. And anyone want to take a guess what this is? Well, it's a temple. Isn't that obvious? But it's not a religious temple. It's a Confucius temple. And this temple, you can see it in just about every major city in the middle of the downtown, Taipei, really. So I walk into this temple, and there are middle school students rehearsing for the upcoming Teacher's Day celebration, which is September 28th. And you probably couldn't really tell from this picture, it's 40 degrees outside. That's why I took the picture in the shade. So this is the environment and the culture that I grew up with. I have my formative years in this culture, being immersed in teaching learning environment. And this picture really says a lot about teachers' role, how we view it, and what we think about learning and teaching in that cultural context, right? We have a temple representing teacher and celebrated every year. And that tradition is, 1,500 years old, but it's still alive and well celebrated. So we're going to share more stories like that today, but let me just frame our discussion today under these 3 very broad themes, and the student will speak to those questions from their experience. And again, these are just very broad area. If you have other questions, we don't have to stick to these 3 questions I asked. So feel free to bring your perspective and bring your questions forward. So the first one is really around teaching methods. If we first look at how we learn and how we teach, the classroom setting, what do we believe and what do we value in that environment? So that's the first question, comparing the experience you guys have at home and then also the experience you have here already or looking forward to in Canada here. The next one is around learning community. And we all know learning community is a key concept and pillar of Royal Road's learning teaching culture here. So I want to highlight that and just ask questions around what is that like for you at home in terms of your cohort, your class, in the school setting or a larger community. And then here at Royal Roads, we have a cohort model, and we're going to have a lot of teamwork in our classrooms. So what is that going to be like? And of course, last but not least, challenges and going forward. Okay, so what are the challenges you see or have experienced, and what type of strategies you have developed, and really just put it out there. Inviting people for more advice or more suggestions and sharing that experience. Okay, just a quick reminder, we do have online participants. That's why Sherilyn is here with me today, monitoring that. So there will be questions, hopefully filtering through her emails there. So if you do want to speak, I'll ask you to speak loudly, or like me, I like to use a microphone because I don't project my voice that far. I will pass the microphone around, so just make sure our online participant can fully hear and see what we're doing here. So without further ado, I'll turn the floor to our students. I'll ask Muyan to start. Okay, and I'll get her slide up for her.
Thank you. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Mu Yuan. I'm a graduate from the MAPC communication program last year. About 2 months ago, the International Student Service Coordinator, Sherilyn Townsend, invited me to join in the student panel and share my experience as exchange student from China. Not until this morning, I finally started to putting together my slides and organizing the thoughts for the assignment. So I have to confess that regardless of my 5-year cultural immersion in Canada, I'm still deeply rooted with a polychronic time perception. Coming from a high context culture, I truly believe that everything will happen when it's time, instead of being planning oriented. I hope my behavior didn't drive Sherilyn nuts, because overall, I intended to make a satisfying presentation, and so that I can not only express the voice of Chinese students, but also to make our group look good, whatsoever. So using Hall's high and low context dimensions as the main parameters, I'm going to talk about the cultural influence on Chinese student learning, in which you may have noticed is quite different from the Canadian way. For those of you who are not familiar with the cultural framework concepts, I'm gonna explain it briefly. In high context culture, communication occurs predominantly through explicit statements in text and speech, while in low context culture, message include other communication cues, such as body language and the use of silence. The research, Hall's cultural framework and Hofstede's five cultural dimensions are frequently criticized for being outdated and archaic in their practice of using geographic borders between nation states as boundaries for cultures. I have to acknowledge that rigid categorization of population fosters stereotypes. In spite of this important criticism, the communication patterns in a classroom setting still resonant with the cultural dimensions proposed decades ago. Chinese is a typical high-context culture, which leans toward nonverbal communication, indirectness, and nonlinear discovery process, which means people tend to use indirect and cyclical approaches in their conversations and writing styles. The presentation that I'm doing right now is a pretty typical example, since some of you might still feel lost about my speech structure and where I'm heading. But don't worry, I will guide you there. So I listed several cultural variables that characterize high-context culture in connection of my analysis of Chinese student learning. So collectivistic cultures prioritize group welfare over the goals of individuals. As you may have noticed, Chinese students don't ask questions in class. If they do, it always happens after class because we don't want to waste others' time in class while posing our own questions. The characteristics of high power distance include many hierarchical levels and autocratic leadership. So I often use an analogy of the emperor's decree to describe my teacher's instruction. So unlike North American students who interpret the information that they take and discuss and debate it in class, Chinese students simply sees it as their job to learn. So thus their learning styles are featured with rote citation and preference for organized academic learning environments. So there are numerous other examples that I can't fully explain here due to the time restraint. However, I believe that if you get the idea of high contact culture that plays a role in Chinese student learning, it won't be difficult to bridge the gap in understanding their struggles. As I have mentioned earlier about the criticism of cultural framework theories, in the light of the increased process of globalization, cultures are increasingly recognized as fluid entities, never absolute, but constant in transition, constantly in transition. So in the Chinese context, the student attitude toward learning is also changing due to the change of the family structure and increased access to learning overseas. How to adapt to the change? Let's look back 2,500 years and seek the wisdom of Confucius. Confucius' pedagogical methods are striking. He never discoursed at length on a subject. Instead, he poses questions, cites passages from the classics, and uses apt analogies and wits for his students to arrive at the correct answers. So here comes to my conclusion. Treat each student as an independent, special individual who can lead the process of inquiry on their own. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. That's wonderful. So you and I are going to start looking for a way of building a Confucius temple here in Canada. Okay. So Joe?
Yeah. A very good afternoon to you all. Sorry I don't have a presentation to share with you, but certainly I felt interaction would be a better thing. I didn't prepare a presentation. Well, my name says Jyotishwar Ala. It's difficult to pronounce. Prefer to be called as Joe. Easy, short, quick, and sweet, of course. So, when Sherlyn approached me to talk about the three major areas, the one which we have seen is the teaching methods, and the second one is learning community, and third one is the challenges what international student would face, which I have faced when I came here. To begin with that, I would like to give a little introduction where I came from and what am I doing here. So I came from South India, a place called Hyderabad. I'm sure most of you are not aware of the place. And I'm presently studying here Masters in Global Management. So we started our program in the month of March. We are 6 months done. Next week is our final exam for the second term. So really excited and waiting for the next term to start because we'll have more number of people floating in that point of time. Well, to start with the teaching methods, I must admire the fact what we goes here, because if I try to compare back to my education, what I did back in India, because I did my MBA finished in 2001, now after 10 years coming to school, very fascinating fact. Second important thing is the methods are slightly different. Of course, we need to acknowledge the fact because I came from another part of the world. The teaching would be basically focused on every aspect of the textbook because textbook is prescribed for the course and the teacher would focus more time on teaching every aspect in the textbook. Here what I've seen is we focus on the important aspects, not on the concepts, every concept. So we go on important aspects which are relevant for the exam, which are relevant for the practical transformation of the knowledge. So I liked it because of course we read the textbook, we understand everything, and at the end of the day we need it's our decision what is required to take it forward to the practical environment. But I like that take what is required. Of course textbook will have a lot of information, you need to study that as well, but which is important, pick that point. And in India, the classes would end with a lot of homework. It means it's not a team assignment or it's not an individual assignment, it's a homework. You need to take some problems or exercise back to your home, solve it, and bring those for the next day class. The teacher would see, correct them. There won't be any kind of a marks for that, of course. It basically shows that how the teacher has taught you and how you transform into your application and how you are working on it. Here I've seen a fantastic thing that is individual and team assignments, of course, which are contributing to the final grade of the individual. But the beauty is the team assignment. Probably I'll talk about this in the next part, which is learning community. We'll park it aside at this point of time. However, overall I like this, the focused approach, which is very important for our growing thing, because in our class we just discussed about the globalization. Here we're talking about internalization. So basically nothing but one is a business perspective, second is a learning perspective. So classroom discussions, case exercise, and assignments, which are giving me immense thought in terms of provoking the real practical requirement, what is required at this point of time. With regard to learning community, back in India, my classmates, of course, India is a very diversified culture with the different cultures around the India. However, I didn't have any kind of a problem in terms of exchanging my ideas with my batchmate or classmate. However, here the focus was predominantly on not only on subject, but also on culture. Because first I need to understand how the emotions need to be managed, because if I start dialogue directly, for me it may be okay, but for other person it may not be as good as how it is appearing to me. So the learning is balance of culture as well as the subject or the course. I think thanks to my fellow student here who presented very well on the half-state gate, the 5 dimensions, power dimensions. Certainly it plays a major role in anything, which we have seen even in one of our course, which is called negotiations. Challenges, it's pretty important factor for any international student. The reason being, some of the acronyms or some of the words what we use here, which are not common everywhere. So when I came here, actually, it's not to comment on my particular teacher. She was very nice, and all the faculties so far were very nice. However, I had a little difficult time to understand what's going on. I need to poke my classmates to ask, what is teacher saying now? Am I missing something here? Or simply record in the initial first 1 month, I simply record what teacher is saying, go back home and do Google research. What was teachers talking about? Why did I miss it? So actually, the reason why, in fact, I've given this feedback when I was filling after my first term feedback, I'm sure Vivi would have noticed it. So I said, in case if you are going to use acronyms, please prepare and give that handout to the student, at least to international students. These are things which we are going to use it. So life will be simple. I'm sorry if it is a mistake, but international student perspective, yes, some difficulties face. And this is a small example which I want to share is sometimes, very rare, I notice that in classroom discussions we take small companies information in the case discussions which are existing in Victoria or Vancouver. I would not be aware of it. Because if you talk about global perspective, probably I would be able to catch it. So that's where I felt a little difficult in terms of managing it. But overall, yes, these are challenges what I faced as an international student when I came here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Joe. And Tim?
Good afternoon. I have to say I'm really enjoying being called a student. It's been a while since I was a student. It has been and is a very humbling experience to sit up here and talk about my experience when I was a student. But Nguyen and Joe have really covered the gist of speaking only as a Kenyan, not as an African in general. The major differences that plague the students, it's more in how the culture is organized. So the biggest thing for me was the relationship I had with my instructor. So first time in Canada was, I did my undergraduate in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And it was a very interesting class dynamic. I walk into class and I would expect that the teacher is God Almighty. And that was, the word was it. And you go into class and my fellow classmates are in pajamas, they're not really paying attention. So it was a very disturbing relationship. Why are you here? Why would you even be allowed to speak dressed like that? Because that is the relationship I had back in Kenya. Then you quickly come to understand that the power distance is not as high in Canada. So it is the relationship between teacher and student is not as big, not as cravicous as it is in Africa. So I quickly learned that my opinions, my views, my values were accepted, wanted, craved for. So as Joe was saying, using examples from Canada, I was like, well, no, in Kenya, this is how a similar company would operate. And it is because you come to find that there is a relationship of trust, of respect between instructor and student. And so with the learning communities as well, we are very collectivist culture, so we value the group as more than the individual. So my views would mostly take second seat to the views of the group. So in Nguyen's example, it is you wouldn't speak up and interrupt the class, whereas when you're looking at a team discussion, your allegiance is to the team. Your allegiance is to your school, the body that you're with at the time, as opposed to that individual approach to looking at the classroom dynamic. So it is not as much what do I have to get from this experience, it is how can I benefit everybody else in this experience. And for instructors, being able to leverage that community drive is useful. So pairing students together. And I think that was one of my biggest takeaways from my experience was hanging out with Canadian students. I had a very good friend and he told me, when I came to Canada, please do not find a group of Africans and hang out with them. Don't. Go and hang out with Canadians as diverse as possible so that when the idioms come up in the classrooms, you'd be able to hear them in general conversation and pick up on that language. So the onus being on us to integrate as much as possible with our friends and our classmates, and for you as instructors to enable and engage those interactions. And that was how that learning community is definitely of value. And again, with my experience here at Royal Roads in the Masters in Intercultural Communication, I was able to actually apply this learning in a Canadian context, so a very personal situation in Kenya. That was huge for me. And that ability to be able to bring that back to the classroom, that intercultural, that international worldview, be it as narrow as my own village in Mombasa, Kenya, to share with my classmates from around the world, that is priceless. And that ability to be able to do that, and again, the value that it adds to myself as a student, being able to again learn those concepts that the textbook is so good at pointing out in general, theoretical, but to learn it from a personal mindset personal experience and being able to share that brings validity to my culture, my life experience, and adds value to what my classmates are learning from the whole process. So as I look back, yes, we had some, there are some big differences. I did not appreciate the fact that I could not go to class well. And this is growing up in primary school, played soccer outside in the plus 40 heat, the soccer field was just dirt. And we had a white shirt and khaki pants, and yeah, you were chastised for coming to class with a dirty shirt and unpolished shoes. Well, I've been playing soccer for the last 45 minutes. So appearance, physical appearance, your posture in class. I was kicked out of class for having a snack one day. So it's really, really regimented. But the freedom to really learn and to express yourselves is something I've really appreciated. Now on the other side, as an employee of Royal Roads and other companies at that, it becomes clear that that is what the industry, that is what Canadian culture in general is about. So being able to learn those skills in the classroom environment really, really helps as we start looking for jobs in Canada and overseas for that matter. Speak up, don't be shy per se. It is, your values are really, really appreciated and help in that educational process. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Tim. So from an old student, if you don't mind me calling you old student, to a brand new student, Luis just came to Royal Roads. Is about to start a new program. So welcome, Luis.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm Luis, studying the Master of Environmental Science and Management, which is online, but I'm on campus. So. I did my my primary, secondary, high school in France, and it's really interesting how the Chinese, Indian, and Kenyan experience just feels very similar to my experience of a French teaching method. It's very much about very directed by the teacher, almighty teacher, with strong discipline. The teachers just shout all day, silence, silence. It's very, the interaction is not something natural because we don't get encouraged to have this interaction. And same for freedom of thought. Like, if they don't just give us a subject and say, okay, go and think whatever you want and we'll share it and have a collective view about it. No, they tell us, the argument 1, argument 2, argument 3, and we've got a paper out of that, and that's how you learn. There's very little outdoor activities. The French system is, from 8:30 till 5, you're in school, 1 hour break for lunch, very intense, book study and stuff. So I think we do miss this kind of social interaction. What else could we say about the way it's taught? Yeah, and then for the community engagement, we do lack this this opportunity to apply what we learn outside the school environment. Whereas I found in Canada or in Australia, where I did my bachelor, that we were given a lot of opportunities to go out in the field as a volunteer or as a, just a student and try to apply what we learned and compare it with what is really going on in the real life. And for the challenges, I think Royal Road University has got a big online aspect of teaching. So that might be a bit of a challenge for French students because we don't have much of this online interaction. Discussions are not very easy to pop out and just have a chat like that. I think the teaching environment is much more relaxed here than what we would expect in France. So that's a point too to have think about. And I guess what I've learned from my experience is that you need to engage with the people. You need to go out and talk to people, but there's a value of sharing your thoughts and having a collective thinking. So I think from my bachelor and now Canadian, well, Australian and now Canadian experience, I've really taken this, this value of going out and trying to have a broad vision of things and take into account all the different aspects of the subjects and what people can bring to it. I'm looking forward to be part of this university, and I think if I'm an international student, it's because I'm quite critical about the French way of teaching, and I do like a lot the more English way of teaching. So I'll be happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Wouldn't you say you should come to the right university? Definitely. Marcela?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. My name is Marcela. I am from Chile, a beautiful country in South America. We have a high growing, a high technology. We have an amazing country. However, the education is very traditional. Like if I compare with Canada or my friend here, it's very, very traditional. For example, the teachers or the professor in the class, before, I want to compare my in university education with a master. In high school, a little different, but I think it's better the university student. The professor in general on class is the authority. It's difficult to start a natural discussion in class. Sometimes when the questions are too long for the answer, the professor said, please, I give the answer after the class, or maybe I send for email. But in general, like I said, friends, every time the professor is silent, silent, silence, no question after class, because the professor just showed the theory. They explain everything in theory, example, generic example, because we have a structure, and a structure on the education. For example, we have a professor, they have the main class, we have a system, we are helped with the example, with the exercise, with the real case, and we have a junior system. They just check the tests, the quizzes, and give us the grade, depend on the test or whatever the professor gives us. But in general, like a student, we interacted a lot with a system. Just because the teacher is the authority, just give the class, the main class, and get up. But the assistant, just we interacted with them. We have a live discussion. We have the same system like a Moodle here in my university in Chile, and in this tool we have the grade, the presentation, some forum, email. It's just like a model, it's almost the same. And in this point, we have a lot of interaction, but with the system, not the professor. In Chile, we don't have a quarter, we have a semesters. We have a 6 month, just one topic. And in general, we don't take just 3 or 4 courses. In general, we take 6, 7 courses. It includes seminary, more jobs, etc. We have a lot of pressure because every week we have a quizzes, assignment, tests, more quizzes for each courses. The pressure is very strong. For the reason when I come here, I have a very nice experience because the tests, there are not too much. I don't have a lot of quizzes. However, the assignment here is totally different. Like I said, my friend here, my assignment in Chile, like this is the question ABC, you need to answer ABC. But here, where I have a question A, I need to do research, I need to say my opinion, but never anybody asked me my opinion before. It was so amazing. Okay, I can give my opinion, my research. The same point, for research and reference, we have a different view. In Chile, when we do some documents, some paper, we put all the reference, but it's not necessary to link in every reference. It's not so strong like here. Here, the plagiarism is very strong, but in Chile, it's important, but it's not necessary. And about the learning community, like I said, we have a system, and in general, my culture is very familiar. We have a lot of friends or big groups, but in general, when we need to do a team assignment, in general, it just maybe like a here in bachelor, this is your part, this is your part, this is your part. The last day we merge everything and send to the assistant. But assistant maybe is a little different to here. Here, if I compare with Chilean education, here I am learning about what is the leadership, what is the difference between to do an individual assignment, like a team assignment, is totally different. Maybe here for me, it's more challenge to discuss every point of view, because in general, I never do it before. For the challenge, for like international student, I think the big first challenge I need to face is I need to do everything in my second language, because in Chile everything is Spanish. The immigrant or the international student, there are almost the neighbor countries, everybody speaking Spanish. It's very difficult to find a foreign international student to speak in English, or for example, the professor going to do the master or PhD outside of my country. However, they come back and speak in Spanish again. And all the paper, all the books, everything in Spanish. This is a challenge too, because sometimes I understand everything, my document, my paper here, but I have a problem in vocabulary. Like I say, sometimes the example here is for Canadian company, European company, but I never listened before. I need to put and go. I do my research, and next section I need to come back with all this information, and the professor again give me a lot of new information. I need to go for do my research. It's a double work, but I enjoy it. Really enjoy it. What else? I don't know if you have any question. No, after that, but thank you.
Thank you, Marcella. So let's be a good Canadian student and let's discuss and have some questions. You can ask the question to individual student or just address the general question, and we'll ask the panel to respond. Teresa, and then Bill.
Hi, everybody. I'm Teresa Bell. I work in the Writing Center. There was an article that came out in one of our national newspapers, the Globe and Mail, on the weekend, I think it was, and it was talking about one of the issues that international students tend to face when they come to Canada is this issue of plagiarism, which a couple of you raised. And what it was talking about is that people coming from other cultures are often expected to word for word repeat what their professor or what their teacher has told them without citing it. And that is a measure of respect or showing that they understood the concept exactly as it was taught to them. And as Marcella has mentioned, it's so different here. I was wondering if you could comment on that as far as what your experience is like coming from your culture and then transitioning to this Canadian expectation regarding plagiarism.
Well, maybe I can say when I did my bachelor in Australia, referencing was the biggest, I think, not issue, but it was really hard for me to understand how to reference and how to use it right. Because you are right that I was used to copy pretty much what the teacher would write on his board and just rewrite it in an essay. So yeah, no, and it's still, I think I'll still go through the Center of Writing to make sure I'm right with So no, I do feel that it is a hard thing.
Well, it doesn't matter what culture you're from, APA is still a monster.
It's hard for English too.
So 5 years ago when I came here, I was late for the course, so I have to do a paper in 2 weeks by the end of the weekend. And I thought I did a pretty good argument for that paper, but the instructor marked me really low, like B, probably B minus. So because of the plagiarism, and I wasn't aware of APA because I didn't get official orientation on using proper APA when I was in the BA program. But when I was doing the MAPC program, as well as being a teaching assistant for the education leadership management for the Beijing cohort, we offered like a full orientation on APA and citation, so it definitely helps. So I think if you tell the students and enforce and emphasize the importance of that format, then I think it will be really helpful for students to catch up.
Actually, that reminds me to share something during my foundation week, which we had. Alicia was a teacher, to be very specific. I was thinking we will be using API, but I was told that we'll use the CMS here, as per the university requirement. So that was a learning curve again starting up there. So CMS, for all the team assignments, we have to use the CMS. So yeah, so we were using APA back in India for all the research and proposals. Here we started using CMS now.
But also there's a big difference between citing correctly and whether it is the need to cite. So if it was, back home my instructor expects me to verbatim write what they said as part of the assignment, and only that would earn me marks, as opposed to have to cite it somewhere. Those, I think, are the two differences to draw from this. We'll probably mess up with the citing at some point, but if it is expected, then it is one thing as opposed to.
There's another point I want to mention, because we're all from different cultural backgrounds, so we can access more resources than the instructor, because some people, while they write the papers, they can just translate some of the article that they retrieved from the website or the database in their own country. So that could be a challenge for the instructor to mark their papers. That's a trick.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Follow-up question? Yes, this really quick. So, do you have any suggestions then as far as ways to ease that transition for international students coming in? Like, Nguyen, you mentioned the inclusion of workshops to teach APA style or that sort of thing. Any other suggestions?
No, that would be good.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Phil, you have a question?
Yeah. First of all, bienvenido a Marcela.
Muchas gracias.
Bienvenue a Luis, Jumbo, Tim. And I'm sorry. I can't help you with that.
All right.
Or you can tell me later, right?
Right now, Joe.
Joe?
Yeah.
So some of you are new, so that's great. But those of you that have gone through the program, was there something that works for you? I'd be curious to find out if there was a particular approach that an instructor took. I know as I teach language courses, so I'm confronted quite early on, and it's a great help to me if I know that they're a second English language speaker. So because I'm having to mark against that, and I tend to create a continuum as an instructor because it's a writing course. So what I do is I actually adjust that continuum based on their background. So if somebody comes at me with a journalism degree, I'm going to mark them a lot harder on journalistic writing. Somebody comes at me with a design degree and their first language was Czechoslovakian, I'm going to be less inclined to mark them more difficultly on that first assignment, for example, but then I'll create a continuum so that if I see an increase, then I mark against that. So these are just some of the idiosyncrasies that I personally have been able to put into my teaching, but I'd be curious to know what worked. Particularly on campus, I think that would be really helpful for us because I think a lot of us here teach on campus. If there's an example of something that really worked for you.
I'd have to say for me it was having a strong community of friends. because that informal learning is where the best learning happens. And when you're struggling with language and culture, having people from that culture who you can talk with, that for me was priceless. So if there's any way in your teaching that you can incorporate, and it happens at Royal Roads with the teamwork element, that is huge. Yeah.
I think your opinion also resonates with the point that I mentioned at the end of my presentation about individualized education or learning, because you treat each student differently based on their own foundation. So I think that's a really good start to go. And based on my experience at RRU, I think the team-based learning is really helpful, because if you you can learn by participating and discussing with your peers, because the purpose for international students to come to a foreign country to study is to learn the culture, and then not to be assimilated, but to absorb the advantage of that part of the learning. So I think teamwork definitely will help.
And if I can just speak to that just briefly from my experience as well, I find, especially for writing, what really worked for me when I was a student was just having that time, because I will go through drafts and get tutors to help me. Teresa's shop gonna be crowded with students, because I seek that kind of individual, because at that point you really need individualized attention. And I got a lot of tutoring help with my writing, and just help students go through that and give them time to really adjust to that. Yes.
So just as a quick follow-up, because I know you're familiar with the stuff I teach, you want to create a certain sort of egalitarian approach to the delivery. But what I found as an associate faculty member, where you're teaching very much in a silo, would integration be a little bit better? Because what I found is that if it does take a certain, even 10% of your students longer to do something, and they've got other courses that they're having to deliver stuff for, I'm wondering if there is some sort of way that we could maybe integrate better. I don't know if there's any other associate faculty here, but I find that challenging, because now I'm very flexible.
Yeah.
But if they say to me, well, I can't write 150 good words because I have to write 2,000 bad words for, is he here? Vanini. It's challenging.
Definitely,
So
and I felt, it wouldn't only be the responsibility of the instructor to help all the students to reach that proficiency level. That's what I say. I go to writing center all the time. I didn't go to my professor to look at my drafts. I have tutors help me to do that, and I have to do a lot of that on my own. But just having that understanding, the process that your learners are going to go through, right? It's not going to be an easy task for them to write academically, given the English their second language. So the flexibility you can build into your course, that's very important. But there's also, like you say, a limit, right? You can't tutor each one of your students. So having the support from the university, having writing center, having tutor available, having their peer to help each other, like some of you have pointed out, having those friends around to be able to ask questions, that's extremely helpful. Yes.
And also, just to follow up on the team, I know time is short, but with that I found there are some instances where the group dynamic tends to be tainted, where you have an international student and the group feels they have to carry most of the weight of that student. So sometimes if the part of that assignment, part of the grading, is to get some detail of that cultural background into the assignment, that would benefit making that international student feel wanted, accepted, and part of that group, as well as learning from the rest of the team.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And overlook some of the grammatical errors. You probably will see some in my slides already. Cindy had a question first.
I was wondering if there was anything within the programs that they had that you guys experienced where we had someone as a buddy system that was actually assigned. I know that my daughter did at UVic, and they were assigned a student in their class who was an international student, and it was their job to take them around, show them the city, do all this other stuff. And it was they actually got, wasn't much, but I think they got 1% extra on their grade for it. But if they did a good job. But because she actually got marked on it, whether she did a good job of helping. But that was part of maybe helping with the, being that first set of eyes of looking at something.
But RU did have some similar system. When I was as an international student from Shandong province, there are 5 Chinese students in our cohort, and we have a designated tutor who would help us with paper and grammar. So that really helped.
Actually, your suggestion reminds me of my previous experience, the buddy system so-called in corporate world. A new employee joining will have a senior employee assisting, and they'll get a 1% extra payout or 1 rank or something in the growth rate. Yeah, that's a good one for any international student who is coming new to the city. Certainly would be a very hand-on-hand experience to gain knowledge of the local area and university people. Of course, certainly in the class too. Yeah.
There's one more question here, and then Tabby. Go ahead.
I have taught in a couple different countries, and for me as a teacher, it was always hard adjusting to grading scales in other countries. In Canada, you only get an A+ if you go beyond my expectations. But in Mexico, for example, if I didn't give a student 10 out of 10, they would feel like they failed. So I was wondering if you could speak about your experiences in Canada, maybe about communicating expectations with your instructors, understanding the instructor's expectations, and perhaps how you felt about grades, the grading scale that we have here. Have any of you experienced difficulties with that?
I wanna begin. In Chile, we have the scale between 1 and 7, and a lot of decimal. But you have a 7 if you have a good job.
Right.
If you do over expectation like the professor one, it's just a congratulation. You just have a 7 and congratulations. But here, for my first assignment, I just did my best, but no, I tried to do the over expectation I have the professor. I remember B less or C, I don't remember, but I feel very, very sad because my first assignment, I failed, and I don't know why. Maybe my second language affect my grade, or maybe my opinion was wrong. What happened? But when I told my professor, she told me, no, the problem is you do very good job, but what's enough? No more than. You don't give me more example, more opinion. And I understand this moment, oh, I need to do more job, more research, I need to give more than me.
How can we help you understand that expectation?
First of all, I would like to say why they have such a high expectation on their scores, so that you understand why they expect that. But they can definitely change as they come along. So for Chinese students, because usually scores matters whether they can get a good job while they graduate, or whether they can apply for a postgraduate school or program. So that's why, and also the parents will also add pressure on the students, and usually the way that they check their students' progress at school is to compare the marks. So that's why students are taught to achieve a better score, and the better the higher the better. But also I noticed that another different assessment system here in Canada is the summative and formative assessment, because in China students focused on more the summative assessment score. So like the final score of the examination determines whether they can get into a higher education institute or not. But here teachers actually also put the same weight on formative assessment, whether they can make progress along the way. So I guess if you can explain to the students why you give that mark, and taught him the things that they can make progress, in the future, and that the students won't be too picky on the scores, but they just want to know how they can achieve a better score. So they need more explanation from the instructor. If they come to you after class, then so probably have to sacrifice some part of your time to explain. Thank you.
I would support that. I had that as well. I had an international student who is domestic because they've lived here, but they haven't gone to school since they were in Czechoslovakia. And the note I got when they didn't get, I think they ended up getting like the first assignment was like it was an unsatisfactory mark in the interests of confidentiality. But it wasn't that bad. I remember getting way worse marks than that. But it was like, how can I face my children? Like it was just like, how can I, and it was a paradigm issue. And so what I did was I did Skype sessions. And once I did that one-on-one Skype session with this person, they understood. And they also, I assured them that if they showed improvement from point A to point B, the marks would get better. And they did. But again, it was that I had to do that special one-on-one thing. And it's time-consuming. But if you can sort of get that bar set early on and create an expectation. The other thing is, she did great. Her last assignment was amazing. Like it was better than people that are native speakers. So, it can really work if you do that one-on-one.
If I can just tell from my experience, I think for the first assignments we do as an international student, we do take it very personally because it affects our ability to, for academics, but also for language. So when we see that we failed in the grammar and in the expression, we do feel like, no good. So I think having the self-confidence with lecturers and understanding that they will be patient and that they will help us improving the language skill, but also the structure and the method of essays and things, that's a great help. And it's an ongoing learning, and we improve from the first assignment to the second to the third. And when we see the improvement, it's great. So just making sure that the students know that, we know the difficulties around being an international student, and that we take that into account when marking the assignment, and that there will be an ongoing work to improve things and be equal to everyone at the end.
Great. Tavi had a question?
Well, I just have to follow up on Emily's comment about grading before I comment. I think my other comment. When I was studying as a student in South Africa, there was an expectation that you shouldn't aspire past a B because if you could get an A, then you should be teaching the course. The professor once told me that. And when I went over to the US to study, I thought they were being overly generous and maybe thought they were suggesting that I should teach the course. Coming fast and free. But that's just a side comment. What I wanted to mention was that in 2008, the BC government commissioned a survey. It's called the International Student Satisfaction Survey. That surveyed students all across international students all across the sector. And one thing that was highlighted in the survey was that international students felt that they could benefit much more from their study experience in BC if they had more opportunities, back to Tim's point, to engage with Canadian or local students. And where students had a higher degree of satisfaction, they had those opportunities. So I think it's very important for us to engender those opportunities for students to engage in class, because it's not going to happen outside the classroom. Our students tend to be commuter students. They come and go. When I say our students, domestic students. And international students tend to often live close to the institution, spend more time in the library, and sort of seek that interaction in this community. I also want to mention that we do have an English language support person to support those students who are non-native English speakers. That's outside of the writing center.
Tanya, in your opening School of Tourism, you all mentioned on the panel there that one of the cultural differences was that you weren't used to open discussion and dialogue in the classrooms. And it's something that we notice as well. It's very difficult sometimes to get some of the ESL students to speak up openly in class. It takes them out of their comfort zone. So from your experiences, what would have worked for you? I mean, what could we do to encourage those students to speak up more and participate more in class?
I would say team presentation or team discussion. So you let them to. They are kind of forced to speak up at the beginning, but because when I was in BA program, I never want to voluntarily just speak up and express my opinions. The main reason is that I was afraid of my accent or my English. It was not really perfect, so I might confuse others. But when I was enrolled into the master program, I started to feel more comfortable speaking English. So it takes time, but definitely you have to use some outside force to encourage them to speak. That's much.
The other thing is just ask questions. Just point. So we'll be very attentive that teacher would ask questions. So let's focus it. And when the question comes, we'll be ready to answer it. That brings the involvement in terms of participating and combining with the student.
And also, I want to add that when you ask a question, a lot of Asian students they will kind of avoid eye contact. Well, one reason is that because they respect teachers, they always focus on taking notes instead of looking at the teacher. So they weren't not listening to your question or instructions. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that they were afraid to be asked. So they try to, avoid the eye contact and pretend that they were busy. So yeah. But anyway, just go ahead and ask.
One thing I think that might help, and given my background from CTEC, is we find sometimes discussion forum having that time to think and process that information and using discussion forum as a way to prep them or to catch those perspectives or their great opinion and just tell them, you still have a lot to contribute, maybe not in the classroom format under pressure to stand up and talk, you could still contribute. So using this technology and those tools very effectively could be a good way to help students as well.
And drawing people in to the conversation. So for example, when a question is raised and you feel that there might be a student here that can answer it, working with First Nation students, for example, right, we would talk about, do we capitalize or don't we capitalize the word Aboriginal? Well, CP says no, I say yes. Why don't we ask the First Nation student what they think? And suddenly we're including that in the pedagogy, right? We're having a discussion about whether to capitalize or not capitalize a word that means a lot to some people,
Well, time is almost up, but I see maybe we'll fit these two questions in and then we have to wrap up. And like I said, we do have flip chart papers there, so if you want to just give us your comment and we couldn't fit it all in, that's okay. We will continue this conversation. I think we'll have more that we will offer to.
Maybe get the one that's in here first, and then I can do
the online one. More, so 3 more questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
The face of railroads is changing. We've typically been distance programs, and I think that probably makes it a bit more challenging to build community that is inclusive of our learners who are coming from other places. But as more and more of our programs are being delivered on campus, what is our campus lacking? When I think about my own university experience and the things that we had that made it a little bit easier to get together, to get to know other people, we're going to have a number of learners in master's programs, in undergraduate programs, who are here 12 months of the year. What do we need to set up so that you can interact better with each other and with people across programs?
I'd say a pub.
Yeah,
I would say more student clubs and unions. Because right now we only have one student union, right, under the University Life management. But I think by engaging students with more extracurricular activities would definitely make them feel more attached to the campus and the learning here.
So when we say activities, actually we don't have ongoing activities as such, extracurricular activities on campus. It could be the student participation or student initiative, but as such we don't have formalized activities like sports, events or something like that, which is going up. So could be a possibility to explore.
It's one of the catch-22s, the cohort model, is that we tend to make our students very insular. we don't go across programs. It's just a catch-22. There's nothing we can really do about that. But we are including, I know in Aboriginal relations, for example, we're including student involvement in events. And I know on the environmental committee we do the same thing. We give opportunities for students to get involved, and we very much hear the student voice on campus activities. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to look at what, as more international students get involved on campus, maybe there's an opportunity for us to include an international role. I know that when we had the Global House, which was a failed residency experiment, they had an open house that was like a cultural night, right? So there's things that we can do, I think, structurally and organizationally to make sure that we're including and doing what Tim had suggested, which is that cohesion piece.
So there was one more question here. And
it's okay. Okay, go ahead. I've got this online, so if people need to go after it, it's okay. You've got online questions?
Okay. Something that Phil said triggered something that I'd like to ask all the panelists, how they feel about being fingered. So, for instance, what does China believe about this issue?
Oh, yeah.
What does Africa believe about this issue? And I think that's something we have to be very, very sensitive to. Student backgrounds into the classroom. It's one thing to make them an expert, but it's quite another to make them speak for billions of people. Yes.
So just to support that, because I feel like I got to defend myself, I did actually approach the student first. I didn't just throw it out there. But yeah, okay.
That's why we want the students to see from their experience, right? Actually, what they have experienced in visual. Exactly to your point.
But then done in a sensitive manner, I think we are all really proud of where we come from.
Absolutely.
So the chance to speak about Kenya, oh my gosh, bring it on! I'd love it. And what I was truly encouraged by was the fact that we speak about where we come from, what we do, where our backgrounds, our values, our beliefs, and when someone questions that, you have the opportunity to think it through and reinforce those values, and then sometimes change if necessary. So by fingering, if done properly and again in a sensitive manner, it is a very, very welcomed opportunity to really rethink what we do. And I speak for myself again, not for the panelists.
But I think it's very motivating to think that you can bring another vision of things or add a perspective to a subject as a foreigner or a different culture. So yeah, no, it was really welcome to be part of it.
But I think the instructor also have to keep the balance while they pose those kind of sensitive topics, because for some countries, the questions could be controversial. Like if they're from different kind of geographic region, they might be offended by others' opinion. So, and also with regarding to the cultural aspect of the response from the students, some people might feel proud to share, but other people, to avoid the uncertainty, which means they're from the uncertainty avoiding culture. Then they tend to become more contemplative. They don't want to share too much because they want to offend others. So it all depends on the instructor whether you can pose this question properly. Thanks.
But I think maybe before start, maybe in the foundation section, maybe it's important to show what is the real cultural difference between Canada or maybe Western culture and the other culture like Latin America, Asia, or maybe with the student go to the one program, maybe they can maybe ask a simple question. What do you think about your country, or what do you think is Canada, or maybe in the foundation can I create a little space for this sharing.
Something I think we in France, for example, we could get uncomfortable with is here lecturers are very approachable and very available, and that's great. But it's true that we do have a culture of distance with lecturers, like in terms of position. You know, you're here, and so it might feel a bit uncomfortable for a student to feel so close to the lecturers at some stage, and not really knowing how to manage this informal relationship you could have with them, and you don't know where to put the boundaries, you know, and what's proper, what's not, and things like that. So, you know, just to take into consideration with some culture might be stronger than others.
Just one perspective which I would like to share, since we're talking about culture. I know it's very sensitive one side, and that side is very strong. Certainly one would feel very sensitive and affectionate about their own culture. Having said that, there are two ways for any kind of a questions or pointing it. One is questioning to know information. Second one is questioning to question the person. So it depends on how we would like to take it and how we would like to get information. I hope that answers.
Thank you. Is there one more question?
I'll do the question online, but if people have to go, I know we're well over time, so if you have to leave, don't feel bad to go out, and we'll have the answer will be recorded anyway. But the question was, what were the key motivating factors you considered when choosing a school to attend outside your home country? So if you can kind of maybe each of you give your perspective, that would be great.
I think it's the program itself. It's more because I came here as an exchange student, so I had no other. Basically, I was in the second year, so I had no other intention to study abroad. So that then the opportunity came, so I just why not then just to study abroad, because my major in China was English. So I would say the collaboration between the two universities. You mean the recognition from the Chinese university of the RU's reputation kind of motivated me or encouraged me to come here.
The first thing which comes to my mind is the reputation of the university. You know, because post my certification, once I complete my graduation, whether the certification is going to be recognized in the market. When I say certification, it means the knowledge of what I bring from academic to the practical world, because there are brands in the market. Number two, of course, after school, everyone has to go to their work. It could be a professional, it could be working in a corporate segment, it could be an academic, it could be NGO, wherever it is, but we'll go for there. So how are we getting it recognized? First, when people see that, oh, this gentleman has studied at so-and-so university, okay, university is very good. So that brings the welcome door to the person to get inside so that we can go and talk about our qualities, our abilities, our capabilities, whatever. So first is reputation. Second thing is, what is the course curriculum is offering? Is that a structured one? Is that informative? Is that going to bring you the knowledge, what you are required or what you are lacking? I think these two things. Last but not least, the cost as well. Right? So is it affordable? It's not affordable. Certainly makes a difference. So these three things will bring a difference.
Yeah, I would echo Joe. That what mine was cost, and then the university's reputation. And then this was in Victoria. I was in Halifax, so it was a lot warmer. So climate is also a factor to consider.
Yeah, well, to me it was a matter of choosing a teaching method. So that was having this interactive teaching. That's what I was looking for. So then choosing the university was but the program and all that. Not much more.
Well, for me, the most attractive was the program. It's difficult to find a very attractive international business program in another university here. And the other point is, with my program, I can integrate an internship. After I can work in what I learned. This is more attractive for me.
Thank you so much, students and everyone here. I think Sherilyn has prepared your appreciation. So thank you again for coming over and making a presentation.
big program. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you.